Welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. Hey, today I've got Jason Roncoroni with me. He is the president of Ordinary Hero Coaching. He is a business coach who helps business leaders, transitioning executives, transitioning military personnel, define their careers and helps get them to the next level. Jason's a combat decorated military helicopter pilot. He also earned his MBA from University of North Carolina School of Business, and we're thrilled to have him here. Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great, Craig, and thank you for having me on your podcast today.
So you're, as we were talking about offline, you're helping a lot of executives, business executives, transitioning military folks, take that next step. And one of the things that I continually battle with people is they really don't know what they want. What are they looking for? What kind of, before somebody makes a big leap, what kind of introspection is, if that's a word, what do they have to look for internally to get to that next level?
Well, Craig, I think that's the primary question that people need to ask. And perhaps in many cases, they don't know to ask it or they're afraid to ask that question. And what I've found through the work that I've done is that particularly for military leaders who have had their formative adult years shaped and conditioned through the military, once you remove that uniform, there is a sense of an identity crisis where I developed a very strong attachment to a uniform. And I would also say that this occurs through businesses for people who develop an identity related to their profession. For example, a doctor or an engineer, they see themselves as an engineer. And then they've got to transition into this leadership role, which for a transitioning military person means that you've got to be able to really kind of step into your most authentic identity and potential beyond the uniform. And for business leaders, what it means is that you've now got to take an approach to where you've got to focus more on connecting with and inspiring people than you do on focused on getting and achieving results related to your profession. And so to me, it's all about this identity story. And I think it's been very pronounced for military personnel, in particular because the military demographic is a shrinking minority across our national landscape. The veteran population is only about 6% of the workforce now, and that number is going to go down to about 3%, which means that reintegration back into society and into meaningful roles to where they can really apply their leadership is going to become a greater challenge as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, no, I it's interesting. I agree with you there. I've worked with a lot of senior transitioning military folks, and it's really interesting. Some of them have been admirals, generals, colonels, lieutenant colonels. And, if I ask them the question, what are you looking for? It's almost like they become lost. And me being a former Navy officer, look, I know how capable and competent, a Navy admiral is who's
absolutely
commanded an aircraft carrier or an air wing. And you're like, man, dude, you're an accomplished leader. What is it you're looking for? And then to try to make them break it down to the basics of what do you feel you can, bring to a business?
Yeah.
It becomes a very hard question for them to answer.
I totally agree with what you're saying there. And, when we spend so much time and focus in the military achieving that next level of responsibility that when we get there, a lot of times we feel like, okay, well, I've arrived. I'm a battalion commander. I'm a brigade commander. I'm a commander of a ship, of a carrier group. I'm an admiral. All these kinds of titles, we tend to believe that we've arrived. And then when we're faced with the proposition of, okay, well, what's next? It's something that, we had 20 plus years of our military life to be able to see that objective that we had with those kinds of command level responsibilities in the military. And now all of a sudden we've got to shift and figure out what does that look like as a civilian? And it's a very difficult thing obviously for military leaders to do. And one of the things that I would really challenge people on who are going through this is to consider the possibility that everything that you've done in the military was a shaping event in order for you to step into an even greater possibility and opportunity beyond the military. And I think that that is a very strong way of framing it and seeing yourself as having a greater potential for what happens next.
Yeah, you're adaptable. You can lead. I mean, yeah, the issue there is with a lot of these guys is, I use a baseball analogy. They're all Cy Young Award winners in baseball.
Yep.
And then the day comes where they retire and all of a sudden they're playing rugby. And, the answer is, we know you're a good athlete, but it's a different game. So now you got to adapt. It's a hard pill. I mean, it's a really tough transition, and it's one that, doesn't start the day you retire. It should start, a couple years before you retire, at least with the mindset of, this is going to end in a year or two. I need to start thinking about what's next.
Yeah. And I think that that's important to do. And, one of the things that I've done is, I've actually transitioned from the military twice. I left as a junior captain back in 2000, and I took a job as an engineer because I had a degree in engineering. So logically, I should then be an engineer. The problem is that I absolutely hated being an engineer. I didn't enjoy the job at all. And there's nothing wrong with being an engineer. It just wasn't for me. And it was a well-paying job. After 9/11 happened, I went back into the military with the determination of exactly what you're saying, which is that I've got to prepare for the next transition. So that's why I went back to school, and I got a degree in organizational psychology, and then I got my MBA through Keenan Flagler. And ironically enough, you'd think that when I retired that I would get it all right. And the fact of the matter is that I still got it all wrong. And the main reason why is because I was so focused on what I was going to do, like you were talking about, whether I was going to play baseball or play rugby. And I wasn't comfortable with who I was as a person and being grounded in who I was, both with, my own unique purpose, what my values, understanding my intrinsic strengths, to the point that you made when we started talking today, understanding what it is that I want. What's the impact, the greater impact that I want to make? How am I going to be an example out here in civilian society? And I never answered those questions. So I was basically, gambling and playing a game of chance, hoping that I would land on the right thing. And over the course of both of my transitions, I had a total of 8 jobs over a period of 3 years before I really kind of hunkered down and focused on this business and took a leap of faith to say, this is how I'm going to give back. This is how I'm going to leave my mark. And what I want to do is I want to inspire other service members, other leaders out there who are going through this same process, to have them have faith in themselves that they can make this difference in their communities and be that example for their communities and their families for what happens next.
Right. So let's talk about, the other 96, 6% are military veterans in the workforce. Let's talk about the other 94%.
Sure.
You get a lot of folks out there that, want to take the next leap in their life. They want to take the next leap in their career. But if you pin them down and say, what are you looking for? They're they're almost clueless. And I give them an exercise quite often that says, hey, look, define, what makes you happy? What do you like to do? And let's focus on that first. What are a few things that you tell business executives who are looking to grow or change to do?
Well, I think fundamentally, I think it's very important that they connect with the things that inspired them to where they are now. See, I think what happens a lot of times is that we get wrapped up into the urgency of the moment in terms of the things that we're doing in our jobs, that we lose sight of what inspired us to kind of go down this path in the first place. And I think that that's one of the important things that I try to do with my clients, is very similar with military leaders, is that, let's try to define what your purpose is. Let's take a look at your values and how you're representing them in the things that you do. And then challenge them to say, what's the best kind of leader that you want to follow to help them determine the kind of leader that they want to be. And very similar to military leaders, because I think leadership is in and of itself that universal construct, is that it's about defining who you want to be, and how you're going to be that example for others. One of the things that I think is a challenge for business leaders that is not the same as military leaders is that in the military, we forge this leader identity from the very first day that you show up as a cadet, or that you show up at an officer candidate course, and it is groomed throughout your entire career. Your entire education and development system is based on your performance and potential as a leader. The same is not true in the civilian world. It is more professionally focused or function focused, where the best engineer is the one who gets the opportunity. The best doctor is the one who gets an opportunity to become a department head or a director. And now they've got to transition from that function focus to that leader identity. And so they've got to make up all that ground that a military leader has throughout their entire career, because now they're being given all this responsibility and all these people, and there's just this massive void there. So it can be very intimidating and somewhat overwhelming to them. So the best thing to kind of do in those cases is, okay, well, let's start with the basics. What inspired you for this job? What kind of a person do you want to follow? And then really go into that introspective work that you had kind of talked about before, to really kind of focus on and seeing in themselves these kinds of qualities so that they can then coach, teach, and mentor those qualities within their team.
Do you have a few exercises? I mean, when you give somebody say, hey, look, let's start at the basics.
Sure.
Where do you start?
Yeah, so I have a lot of different exercises that I use, and a lot of them, they work for both business executives and transitioning military. Some of it deals with being able to connect to, your deeper why of your story. And it really kind of focuses on finding the commonalities between, your role models that you've had through the past, events which have which have had a significant impact on you, to kind of formulate what your purpose statement might be. And then I actually have what I call a values algebra kind of a program where people will go through and they'll identify words and phrases that really kind of resonate with them. And then I'll challenge them in terms of how those things are tested or honored or not honored throughout the course of their lives, in order to help them really kind of define the why, which is that deeper purpose, and then the who, which is those values. So all of my coaching sessions are really kind of this exercise focus, not to kind of do it as a homework, but more to kind of inspire thought. What I found is that there are some people who will go through and they'll do all the exercises and it'll be a great experience for them. And then I found that others will see the exercise and just going through a part of it is enough to kind of trigger a lot of thoughts and some of that deeper inspiration that we were talking about, for them to get better connected with themselves so that they can really kind of step into their true leadership potential.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people, making a transition is scary. Switching jobs.
Absolutely.
It's scary. Moving from New York to LA or Texas.
Yeah.
It's scary. Change is strange. In your coaching process, I'm sure you get a lot of people who are the right person in the wrong job And but it's okay. They know they're the right person in the wrong job, but making the switch is too scary for them, so they don't do it. How do you help
Yeah.
them over that?
I mean, I was that guy. And I think that's one of the things that I remember when I have these conversations is that those memories are very visceral to me because I hated being an engineer when I was an engineer. I didn't like it. And in fact, I took a side job working with at-risk young adults in my off time in the evenings. And it got to a point where I was spending more time at the second job than I was at my first job. And my second job was paying pennies on the dollar to what I was making as an engineer. But I didn't have enough confidence in myself to step off and try something new. And then when the tech bubble burst, they shut down all the manufacturing plants and I no longer had my engineering job. So it took, the rest of events to kind of take control and force me into making a change before I was willing to do so. And so I appreciate that. But having made that change, I'm able to kind of recognize and understand all the benefits of wading into that very uncomfortable space to figure out what it is I truly wanted to do. At the time, it was about going back into the military and really exploring this construct of leadership, which is why I went back to school for psychology and got the MBA on top of that. But when I left the second time, it was the determination of, okay, Jason, you've been here before, and now are you willing to kind of step into and take the risk and do this business thing? And I really was able to kind of leverage my own personal experiences in that. And that's what motivates me and provides me the energy to show a lot of compassion to people who are struggling through this, because I know what it's like to be there.
Yeah. For me, it's, look, I don't know, maybe my personality is a little bit different, but I've always, typically I'm the guy who walks on the left side of the road when everybody else is on the right. I actively, and it's like I actively do things just to be different. And, it irritates a lot of people, but what the hell? That's why I own my own business too.
Yeah.
But on the flip side too, I talk to people all the time. They're just miserable where they're at. They're in the same company for 25 years. They're not willing to take that step out. And my advice to them is, Bed Bath and Beyond had a saying in the long-term CEO had a saying, we're not in a hurry to make mistakes. And I'm sort of in the mindset in life that make a lot of mistakes, be in a hurry to make them, because that's the best way to learn and, plow forward. How do you teach people to make mistakes and get out of their comfort zone a little bit?
Well, I think it comes from the realization that, that you can play this game of life safe, but it's the only time you're going to get a chance to play this game. And one of the hardest questions that I ask people is, when is the time going to be right? Are you going to wait until your kids are gone? Are you going to wait until, you're in your 60s and you're not going to have, a lot of the physical abilities that you had as a younger person? Like when are you going to put your faith in yourself to live your life as you want? Because a lot of what we do and a lot of what I hear people talk about is, I got to pay for my kids' college. I got to pay the mortgage. And all those are very true things. And one of the challenges that I ask them is okay, so let's say that your son or daughter came to you and they had an opportunity, and that opportunity really connected with their passion, but it meant that they would have to release this death grip that they have on this idea of security. What advice would you give them? And overwhelmingly, one of the things that I hear is that, well, I would tell them to go pursue their dream. And it's the obvious question that follows is what would it take for you to kind of really follow your own advice there? Because you're willing to have enough faith in your son or daughter to figure out the mortgage, to figure out, the college tuition or whatever, the retirement nest egg. You're willing to put that faith in them. So what would it take for you to have that faith in yourself and to be that example for them, so that when they're faced with that challenge, they're willing to say, you know what, I remember when my dad stepped off to do this.
Yep.
He took a chance on his own happiness to be the kind of person he wanted to be, or my mom did this and they did it. And I think we lose sight of the fact that while we're so busy trying to provide these material things and elements of security, that sometimes the greatest thing that we can do for the people we love is to be the example of the man or woman that we hope for them to become.
Yeah. So here's where I'll get kind of direct, to everybody. A lot of people, if I had a nickel for everybody that told me this, I wouldn't have to work ever again in my life. And here's the phrase: my son or daughter is in 7th grade. I can't relocate to a better job because that would mean taking them out of school and putting them in a new environment and shattering their lives. To which my response mentally, I very rarely say this directly, is if you took your kids out of their safe environment and put them in a new school on the other side of the country and put them in a strange environment and made them find their way a little bit, you'd be doing them a favor.
Yeah.
Because you're teaching them how to adapt. You're teaching them how to be diverse. You're teaching them life skills that they would not get with the same kids in the same place for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely.
And every executive who's out there listening to this, who thinks that, they're going to shatter their kid. I moved 17 times by the time I was 25 years old, I moved 17 times in my life.
Man, you got me beat.
And I love it. There's not an environment I can't go to where I'm just not like, okay, cool. I'm in New York City. Great. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm in LA. Great. Here's what I'm going to do. I love it. And, I thank my father for, getting transferred a lot because it made my brother and I, adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point. And the other thing that I would add to that is, what kind of example are you setting for your kids in terms of how you're showing up for them? Because if you're miserable in your job and that's what they see, the question you got to ask yourself is the relocation worth them seeing that side of you all the time? Because I don't think we're really paying attention, and we're so focused on what we're calling these responsibilities and what I think our ego is telling us we have to do in these definitions of success, that a lot of times we're losing sight of how we're really showing up for our families. Mm-hmm. And, because you always hear these stories about how these families that don't have a lot have this tremendous happiness and this strong core of love that they all share. Sometimes it's worth remembering that how we show up is probably more important than all the things that we provide. Being able to be responsive and compassionate to our kids who have a bad day at school, who are struggling to make a sports team, or, how to break up with a friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, because we're not all burned out from our job and we can actually be present and there for them.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would argue that maybe that's more valuable than the challenge of relocating to another place. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, what kind of the conversation that you're teaching your kids when you sit there and say, we're going to move halfway across the country because I got a great opportunity, which is going to pay me more money, which is going to allow us to live a little bit of better lifestyle and help pay for your college. And it's going to be a scary transition, mm-hmm. but we're all in the canoe together and we're all going to get the benefits of the upside, and we're going to work together to manage the strangeness that comes along with that.
Yeah.
i.e., we're all in this canoe. That's a heck of a lot of better. That's a hell of a lot better conversation to have with your kids than, hey, you got to go to college. I got to pay for this stuff. don't mind the fact that I'm miserable 40 hours a week, you're going to go to college. I don't think kids understand that or
Right.
want to understand it.
Right. And, and let's face it, the whole dynamic of the next, we're assuming that our kids are going to want to do all the things that we did. And I think it's nice to make perhaps those assumptions, but the dynamic of what these next generations really want is changing. And a lot of kids are not necessarily going to college right away. One of the examples that I always fall back on when we talk about, the saving money, I come from a very blue collar kind of a family. Both parents had to work. My mom had to work the third shift at the hospital. We didn't have money when I was growing up. And it's one of the reasons why, I ended up going to West Point was because, I had an opportunity there. And because I didn't think that my parents could have it to pay for our college. My wife really comes from the same kind of background. And between the two of us, we've got 5 degrees that our parents never paid for. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that I always challenge people with is that, what would it take for you to believe that your child has the ability to do that for themselves? And if they did, how would you show up differently for them? Like, what kinds of things would you do differently if you weren't worried about the money? And what I find very remarkable is that many times they would be spending more time with their families. They would be going on more vacations. They would be more present. They would be doing things like coaching sports teams and being more actively involved in the school. And what I'm afraid of for a lot of these people is that when those opportunities and those times have passed by and you can't get them back, that's when they're going to regret those things.
Right. Kids and, kids are, today they need to be adaptable.
Absolutely.
The world is, the world is a fast-paced environment. Technology changes. People who adapt will thrive. Or people who have the ability to adapt will thrive. People who don't have the ability to adapt will be left behind.
Yeah.
And, and I think that's, maybe as, in our own careers, that's what we need to be teaching our kids is try everything. Learn it, make mistakes, adapt, figure it out. And, you'll have the confidence that no matter what comes your way, will be great for you.
Absolutely. And remember always that the greatest example that they see, whether it's what you want them to see or what you don't want them to see, is you and how you show up every day. And I think that that's very important to remind ourselves of that, as leaders, the first people that we lead are the people who live within our own household.
Absolutely.
And how we show up there is so important. And if we're not willing to tend to that, it's going to be really hard to project that leader persona outside.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, so when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm ready to make that transition," you help them with you help them, take that inside view to really get a good idea about themselves. What's the next step? Do you tell them, "Hey, look, let's put it on paper. Let's define it." Do they create a personal mission statement for where they go?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because one of the things that I have them do, and it's another exercise that I have them do, is I actually have them write a statement of intent for their life. And the statement of intent is based on the military format of the commander's intent, which is kind of from the Army, where there is a broader purpose statement, which is the bigger why that we had talked about earlier. And then it gets into the method, which is these are the things, kind of the key tasks of the things I want to achieve in my life. And then we talk about the end state. And the end state is what winning looks like. And we approach end state from several different perspectives. From my own perspective in terms of what do I achieve for myself? What do I achieve for my team? What do I achieve in regards to the mission of whatever organization or company or business that I'm working with? And then the end state regarding my community impact. And so we take that as, that's kind of the action statement, which guides the things that they're going to do. And so kind of the guidance, the overarching guidance for them to follow or not to follow, it's really up to them, is that, to try and see if they can make decisions in their lives that are consistent with this. And when it's not, maybe they need to adjust that, because it is a living document. But it really comes down to formulating that statement of intent for what they want to achieve for the next half of their life.
What about companies? You're coaching, you're working with companies.
Yeah.
I always thought that this would be, I know more and more companies are thinking about doing, some are starting to do it. Why don't more and more companies offer career coaching or, coaching in general to their executives?
My own opinion about that is that I think it's something that they don't necessarily understand. They don't appreciate really kind of the intimacy and the vulnerability that goes into building a coaching relationship. And I think that that's probably one of the greatest limiting factors. I think the next generation has a better appreciation for that, because you got to remember, if I excel and I progress up the corporate ladder, the model that I have for success is the path that I took. And so if my path didn't involve coaching, then I'm not going to understand why it would benefit somebody. But I think, because there is a greater disconnection cross-generationally between organizations and between levels and echelons within organizations, I think that the younger generations are going to want more of this personalized engagement for executive development. And so I think that it will continue to grow. But I think one of the greatest limiting factors is that many of the people who have succeeded and who are in these positions of authority, they didn't need the coaching for them to get to that point. So it's hard to sell them on why somebody else might need it.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that I think the higher you are in the food chain, quite frankly, the more coaching you probably need, because it's lonely at the top. If nothing else, you've got an independent somebody or another to bounce ideas off of, to bounce thoughts, fears, whatever off of.
Yeah, and I think that's very important too, is that's the value of a coach, especially when you're up there, because everybody turns to you. And so who do you kind of go to have your reflection, to help challenge yourself, to ask you those very difficult questions that maybe nobody else is asking you, so that you can stay really oriented on your path to achieve your intent and the things that you want, and that's the value of a coach at that level. I couldn't agree with you more. And, the benefit of, because we both come from the military is that this is an element, this coaching, teaching, mentorship role of the leader is something that is very deeply ingrained in our culture in a way that it is not ingrained in a lot of the corporate culture. So we grew up with this through the military. And what I'm finding is that there is a greater void and commensurately a greater need for this in the civilian world.
Yeah, well, I find that you mentioned it earlier on, and the civilian world is not understanding the transitioning military member. It's almost a different language.
Yes.
The transitioning military member is very much a generalist. You take a young captain or a lieutenant or a major and you throw something at them, they'll take the ball and run with it.
Yeah.
And they'll do well with it. You put them in corporate America and people will say, what can you do? And they'll say, if you give me a project, I'll take it and I'll learn it and I'll run with it.
Yep.
And I think for, in a lot of ways, I think that, for business and military members to really start to succeed in integrating, those languages are going to have to, those languages are going to have to be taught. Now, I'm not sure how that's done on a micro scale, but maybe it's more community involvement or whatever. But, I think that, to get the mindsets more in parallel needs to occur.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of work that we have to do to kind of cross that divide. And we spend a lot of time in the transition space, really kind of focused on the transitioning service member. And I think one of the things that we're losing is we're not spending enough time educating the civilian society about the potential of these men and women, because, and I'm sure your career was the same way, where regardless of your MOS as an officer, you can really be put into a lot of different kinds of challenging positions, whether it's human resources, education, logistics, operations, intelligence, which is, the other form of marketing. You can do all these jobs and you become very, attuned to kind of learning on the job and using these as opportunities for your growth. And, in the civilian world, they're really kind of looking to focus you on one function. And you are a multifunctional kind of a person trying to fit in a one function kind of a world, where your greatest quality is to be able to connect and inspire people, which in many cases is the greatest challenge that a lot of civilian organizations have. So that is, that disconnect there is the greatest challenge that I see, when it comes to successful integration, not necessarily just of veterans into the workplace, but also that leadership potential that can help our communities, our corporations, our businesses, our neighborhoods.
Right.
We're also losing on that.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you a company that's been doing a really good job is Amazon.
Yeah.
Amazon sort of looks at their business and they look at a military operation and they go, we're kind of like a military operation. We're highly caffeinated. We're a little bit decentralized in that we do a lot of different things. We're very operations focused. Who can adapt to this? And I'm seeing more and more military people going right to Amazon, and they're fitting in well. And I kind of like that, because Amazon is going, hey, look, what type of personality do we need? Well, it's that guy. Businesses maybe just need to open their minds up, just open the aperture a little bit and say, look, let's quit looking at finance or manufacturing or operations, and let's just go get a good person in there.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, and I think this is perhaps one of the reasons why Amazon does it well, is because it's not just about solving today's problem, it's about tomorrow's challenge and who's best equipped to do that. And when you look at the things we ask military leaders to do in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, there is nobody who has better field training and preparation to operate in that environment than these military leaders. And I think Amazon recognizes that. So it's not just about winning today, but also how do I build a team that can seize the opportunity to win tomorrow? And I think that's what gives them that competitive edge.
Yeah, and the thing is too, it's a heck of a lot easier for businesses to teach people their business,
yes,
than it is to teach people how to be good or how to be leaders or how to get stuff done. I mean, at the end of the day, if you find an intelligent, highly motivated person, get them in the chair. In 2-3 months, they'll figure out your business and life will be grand. But if you find somebody who's functionally good, but can't figure out how to grow, you've got them you've got them filling one little gap, for a long, long time to come. And if you grow, they're not going to fill it. You're going to have to go find somebody else.
That's right.
So it's an interesting thing.
Absolutely.
Hey, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So my website is ordinaryherocoaching.com. Or you can reach me by email, and it's just Jason, my last name, Roncoroni, at ordinaryherocoaching.com. And people can connect with me there. They can ask me questions. They can schedule some time to meet with me. I look forward to continuing to have opportunities to help people.
Let's have you back on in a month or so.
That sounds
and
great.
talk about some new, talk about some of the great things you're doing, and continue the conversation.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Jason, thanks for coming on today.